She stood at the altar in a $12,000 wedding dress, hand-beaded with Swarovski crystals that caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the chapel windows. 200 guests sat in stunned silence, their programs still folded neatly in their laps. The violinist had stopped playing, the photographer had lowered his camera. But the groom? Nowhere to be seen. What happened next became national news, and the worst kind of fairy tale ending you could imagine. The bride, 28-year-old Madison Clare, stood there for exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds before she began to laugh. Not the nervous giggle of an embarrassed woman, but the deep, haunting laughter of someone who had just pulled off the performance of a lifetime. Because what the guests didn't know, what even her own family sitting in the front row didn't realize, was that there had never been a groom to begin with. The man they thought they were celebrating? He didn't exist. Madison had created him, lived with the lie for 8 months, and convinced everyone, including herself, that her perfect wedding was just days away. But how did it come to this? Why did she do what she did next? And more importantly, how many other people had fallen victim to her web of lies before this moment? Before we continue with this story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Madison Clare wasn't always her name. Born Sarah Beth Thompson in small-town Millfield, Ohio, she grew up in a single-wide trailer with her grandmother after her mother abandoned her at age 7. Her grandmother, Betty, worked double shifts at the local diner to keep food on the table, but Madison always dreamed of something bigger. She would spend hours cutting out pictures from bridal magazines she found at the library, creating elaborate scrapbooks of the wedding she would have someday. By age 16, she had already planned her entire ceremony down to the color of the napkins and the font on the invitations. After high school, Madison moved to Miami with $200 in her pocket and a suitcase full of those wedding scrapbooks. She enrolled in business school using student loans she had no intention of paying back, and within 3 years had transformed herself into the kind of woman who belonged in the luxury wedding industry. She changed her name legally, learned to speak with a polished accent that erased any trace of Ohio, and started Madison Clare Events, a high-end wedding planning company that promised to make dreams come true. Her Instagram account showed a life of pure luxury, champagne brunches with Miami's elite, behind-the-scenes photos from million-dollar weddings, and testimonials from brides who called her a miracle worker. She drove a white BMW convertible, lived in a waterfront condo in Coral Gables, and wore designer clothes that cost more than most people's rent. But there were cracks in the perfect facade, and someone was lying about everything. What her followers didn't see were the maxed-out credit cards hidden in her Hermes purse, the threatening letters from creditors stuffed in her junk drawer, or the bottles of anxiety medication she kept in every handbag. Everyone saw the $60,000 cake she posted about on social media. No one saw the secret she kept in her phone that would destroy everything she had built. Madison's vision for her own wedding was more elaborate than anything she had ever planned for a client. She wanted 20-foot floral arrangements of white orchids and peonies, a live butterfly release during the ceremony, and a reception that would cost more than most people's houses. She spent months creating Pinterest boards with thousands of pins, each one more extravagant than the last. The guest list grew from 50 close friends and family to over 300 people, including several Miami socialites she barely knew, but desperately wanted to impress. The financial pressure began to mount in ways that would have crushed anyone else. Madison took out personal loans using fake employment documents, opened credit lines under slightly altered versions of her name, and even convinced 3 different banks to give her wedding loans by using different venue addresses. She was burning through money at a rate of $15,000 per week, booking vendors with deposits she didn't have and making promises she couldn't keep. Her wedding planner notebooks were filled with calculations and crossed-out numbers, a desperate attempt to make the math work somehow. Her fiancé, the man she called David Mitchell on social media, started showing signs of what she told everyone were cold feet. She would post screenshots of text conversations where he seemed distant, writing things like, "What if we just run away instead?" and "Do we really need all this?" Her followers rallied around her, offering support and advice for dealing with a nervous groom. What they didn't know was that Madison was writing both sides of those conversations, creating fake drama to explain away inconsistencies in her story. 2 weeks before the wedding, her assistant found Madison crying in the bridal suite of the venue during their final walkthrough. When asked what was wrong, Madison whispered through her tears, "If he ruins this, I'll ruin everything." It was a moment that seemed heartbreaking at the time, but looking back, her assistant would realize it was actually a threat. What no one knew was that the wedding wasn't even the real plan. Madison had something much more calculated in mind, something that would shock everyone who thought they knew her. 3 days before the wedding, Madison's assistant Emma was helping to organize the bridal suite when Madison's phone fell out of her purse and cracked against the marble floor. The impact caused the screen to unlock, revealing a text conversation that made Emma's blood run cold. The messages were between Madison and someone named Marcus, and they weren't talking about flowers or venue details. "Don't worry," one message read. "He thinks he's the only one. He deserves this after what he put me through." Emma scrolled through more messages, her hands shaking as she realized what she was seeing. Madison had been planning a second wedding with a different man for the exact same weekend, in a different city. The messages revealed months of coordination, with Madison telling Marcus that she had called off her first engagement to be with him. There were photos of a second wedding dress, discussions about a honeymoon in Italy, and detailed plans for a ceremony in Charleston, South Carolina. But the most chilling discovery came when Emma found voice messages Madison had sent to Marcus late at night, when she thought no one would hear them. In one message, her voice was cold and calculated in a way Emma had never heard before. "He thinks he's getting his perfect bride," Madison whispered into the phone. "But what he's really getting is everything he deserves. I've planned this down to the minute, and by the time anyone figures it out, it'll be too late." Emma confronted Madison that evening, expecting an explanation or even an apology. Instead, Madison calmly took the phone back and smiled. "Sometimes," she said, "people need to learn that actions have consequences. David broke my heart once, and Marcus broke someone else's. They both deserve to know what it feels like to be abandoned at the altar." Emma realized with growing horror that she wasn't looking at a confused bride-to-be, but at someone who had been planning revenge for months. But this was just the beginning. Because when Emma tried to contact Marcus to warn him about what Madison was planning, she discovered something that would change everything. The second groom she had been texting with for months didn't exist either. Madison had created him too, along with an entire fake wedding in Charleston that was never going to happen. If you're still watching, drop a comment with the word "still here." Let's see how many of you are locked into this story. When David Mitchell, Madison's supposed fiancé, received a panicked call from Emma about the text messages, he initially didn't believe her. David, a successful real estate developer, had been dating Madison for 8 months and thought he knew everything about the woman he was about to marry. But when he started asking questions, the answers didn't add up. Madison claimed the messages were part of a surprise she was planning, then later said they were for a client whose wedding was the same weekend. Each explanation contradicted the last, and David's suspicion grew. That night, David did something he had never done before he went through Madison's personal belongings while she slept. What he found in her home office made him question everything he thought he knew about the woman lying next to him. There were multiple driver's licenses with different names, credit cards in the names of people he had never heard of, and a file cabinet full of wedding contracts for events that had apparently never taken place. One folder was labeled Sarah Thompson, Original Identity, and contained birth certificates, school records, and photos of a young girl who looked like Madison but lived a completely different life. The deeper David looked, the more disturbing the truth became. Madison's wedding planning business, which she claimed had made her wealthy, was completely unregistered. Her office address was a mail forwarding service, and her business phone number redirected to a Google Voice account she managed from her personal phone. Bank statements showed money coming in from desperate couples who had paid deposits for dream weddings, but the money never went to vendors or venues. Instead, it funded Madison's lifestyle, the designer clothes, the luxury car, and the waterfront condo that was actually a rental she could barely afford. David found contracts with over 17 different couples, all of whom had paid Madison thousands of dollars for wedding services that were never provided. The dates on the contracts showed that Madison would book multiple weddings for the same weekend, collect deposits from each couple, then disappear when it came time to deliver. Phone records showed frantic calls from brides who couldn't reach their wedding planner in the weeks leading up to their ceremonies. One voicemail that still haunts David was from a bride named Jennifer who was getting married in 2 days and had just learned that the venue Madison booked didn't exist. The real fiancé, Jason, begins investigating. Emma had been wrong about the name. David wasn't David Mitchell at all. That was just another lie Madison had told her assistant. His real name was Jason Chen, and he was a software engineer who had met Madison at a charity gala where she was volunteering as an event coordinator. Now Jason found a folder on her computer labeled Exit Plan, and what was in it chilled him to the bone. The Exit Plan folder contained everything Madison needed to disappear completely. There were multiple passports with different names, bank accounts in 3 different states, and detailed instructions for changing her appearance and starting over in a new city. But most disturbing of all were the profiles she had created for her next identity. Madison had been researching wealthy widowers in Seattle, creating fake social media accounts to begin building relationships with them while she was still engaged to Jason. Jason's investigation revealed that Madison Claire Events had never been a real company in any legal sense. The business license was fake, the insurance policies were forgeries, and the professional certifications she claimed to have were purchased from diploma mills on the internet. Her entire wedding company was built on stolen identities and false documents. She had been using the social security numbers of deceased women to open credit lines and the addresses of foreclosed homes to establish fake businesses. The scope of Madison's deception went far beyond wedding planning. Jason found evidence that she had been operating multiple businesses simultaneously, all of them fraudulent. There was Madison's interior design studio, which took deposits for home renovations that never happened. There was Claire's catering company, which booked expensive events and then disappeared with the money. And there was Sarah's event photography, which charged couples thousands of dollars for wedding photos they would never receive. The venues Madison had been recommending to her clients were never actually booked. She would show couples beautiful photos of reception halls and gardens, take their deposits, then create fake contracts using the venue's letterhead. On the day of the wedding, couples would arrive to find locked doors and confused staff who had never heard of Madison Claire Events. The psychological damage to these couples was immense. Many of them had to cancel their weddings entirely, losing not just their money but their faith in their ability to trust anyone. Jason contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit and learned that Madison was part of a growing trend of wedding-related fraud that was costing Americans millions of dollars each year. The FBI confirmed that fake wedding planners who take tens of thousands of dollars up front and disappear before the wedding day were becoming increasingly common, with some cases involving losses of over $186,000 for multiple couples. But Madison's case was different because she wasn't just stealing money, she was stealing entire identities and creating fake lives for herself. So where did all the money go? That's when Jason found the passport that revealed Madison's ultimate plan. She wasn't just running from her victims, she was planning to become someone else entirely, and she had already started the process. When Jason finally confronted Madison about what he had discovered, her response was unlike anything he could have expected. There was no shame, no remorse, and no attempt to deny what she had done. Instead, Madison looked at him with the same cold smile Emma had seen and said, "You should be thanking me. I gave you the most exciting 8 months of your life. How many people can say they almost married a master artist?" Madison's ability to gaslight and manipulate was so sophisticated that even with overwhelming evidence of her crimes, Jason found himself questioning his own sanity. She told him that he was stressed from wedding planning and that his accusations were the result of pre-wedding anxiety. "Everyone gets cold feet," she said, gently stroking his arm. "You're just processing your fear of commitment by creating these elaborate fantasies. Maybe we should take a trip somewhere quiet where you can clear your head." The next morning, Jason woke up to find Madison gone. Her side of the closet was empty, her personal items had been removed, and there was no note or explanation of any kind. It was as if she had simply evaporated, taking with her any trace of the life they had built together. Her car was gone, her phone went straight to voicemail, and her social media accounts had been deleted overnight. Even more disturbing, when Jason tried to contact her family in Ohio, he discovered that the grandmother she had talked about constantly had died 3 years earlier, and there were no other relatives who had heard from Sarah Beth Thompson in over a decade. Jason filed a police report, but the officers seemed skeptical of his story. A runaway bride wasn't unusual, they told him, and people had the right to leave relationships without explanation. It wasn't until Jason showed them the evidence of financial fraud that they began to take the case seriously. Within hours, the local police had contacted the FBI, and federal investigators were involved. The case was no longer about a wedding gone wrong, it was about wire fraud, identity theft, and a complex criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. An FBI agent named Special Agent Rodriguez told Jason something that would haunt him for months afterward. This wasn't a runaway bride. This was a master con artist who had been planning her exit strategy long before she met you. You weren't her victim, you were her cover story. But even the FBI wasn't prepared for what Madison would do next, because she hadn't actually left town like everyone assumed. On the morning of what should have been his wedding day, Jason made the difficult decision to call every guest and vendor to cancel the ceremony. The venue, which had been paid in full months earlier, was understanding and offered to reschedule for a future date. The caterers, the florist, and the DJ all expressed sympathy for Jason's situation and promised to return any deposits that could be refunded. By noon, Jason thought the worst was behind him. He was wrong. At exactly 3:30 in the afternoon, the time the ceremony was supposed to begin, a white limousine pulled up to the chapel. Jason's mother, who had stayed behind to collect some personal items, watched in shock as Madison stepped out of the car wearing her $12,000 wedding dress. Her hair and makeup were perfect, her bouquet was fresh, and she walked toward the chapel doors as if nothing had changed. Security cameras captured what happened next, and the footage would later become crucial evidence in Madison's trial. She entered the empty chapel, walked down the aisle, and took her place at the altar. For several minutes, she stood there in complete silence, as if waiting for a groom who would never come. Then she began to speak, addressing the empty pews as if they were filled with wedding guests. "Thank you all for being here on this special day," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent chapel. "I know some of you had your doubts about David, but I want you to know that our love story has been worth every challenge we've faced." She continued with what sounded like wedding vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish a man who existed only in her imagination. The wedding photographer, who hadn't been canceled and was still expecting to work, arrived during this moment and began recording, thinking it was some kind of artistic photo shoot. After completing her vows to no one, Madison turned toward the empty chapel and shouted, "I made this happen! I brought all of you together! You all owe me everything!" Her voice echoed off the walls, and the photographer realized something was very wrong. Madison then reached into her bouquet and pulled out a champagne flute filled with what appeared to be champagne. She raised it in a toast to the empty room and said, "To new beginnings and second chances." Then she drank the entire glass in one gulp and collapsed. And then something happened that shocked everyone who witnessed it. She collapsed to the marble floor, and what was in her champagne glass would reveal the final twisted layer of Madison's plan. The paramedics who responded to the 911 call found Madison unconscious but breathing, her wedding dress spread around her like a broken dream. Initially, everyone assumed she had poisoned herself in a final dramatic gesture. But toxicology tests revealed something different. There was no poison in the champagne glass, just a mixture of prescription sleep aids and anti-anxiety medication that Madison had carefully calculated to cause a dramatic collapse without serious harm. The hospitalization that followed revealed the depth of Madison's psychological manipulation. She had planned every detail of the wedding day breakdown, including the timing, the location, and even which emergency room she wanted to be taken to. Her goal wasn't suicide, it was to create a public spectacle that would generate sympathy and potentially help her avoid prosecution. She had researched legal cases where defendants claimed mental illness or emotional breakdown as a defense, and she believed that collapsing at her own wedding would provide evidence of psychological instability. But Madison had underestimated the FBI's investigation. While she was in the hospital, federal agents were executing search warrants on her apartment, her storage units, and her various business locations. They found evidence of fraud dating back 5 years, involving dozens of victims and hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen money. The case against her was so overwhelming that her own attorney advised her to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. The trial became a media sensation, with victims traveling from across the country to testify about how Madison had destroyed their special days. Jennifer, the bride whose venue had never been booked, testified through tears about having to call every wedding guest to cancel her ceremony. Marcus, who turned out to be a real person Madison had met online and manipulated into believing she was single, described how she had used his emotions to practice her manipulation techniques. Even Madison's assistant Emma took the stand, describing the months of lies and the moment she realized her boss was planning something terrible. The most powerful testimony came from Jason, who spoke not just about the financial damage, but about the psychological impact of loving someone who had never really existed. "She didn't just steal money," he said. "She stole hope, trust, and faith in love itself. She took something beautiful, the idea of marriage, and turned it into a weapon." The judge sentenced Madison to 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. She was also ordered to pay over $400,000 in restitution to her victims, money she didn't have and would likely never be able to repay. Today, Madison sits in a federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania, where she works in the prison library and has reportedly started writing a memoir about her experiences. Prison officials say she has been a model inmate, participating in therapy programs and expressing what appears to be genuine remorse for her actions. Her release date is set for 2031, and she will be required to complete 5 years of supervised probation after serving her sentence. Jason has rebuilt his life in ways he never expected. He wrote a book about his experience called The Woman Who Never Was, which became a bestseller and helped him process the trauma of loving someone who had never really existed. He now speaks at conferences about financial fraud and has helped law enforcement agencies understand the psychological manipulation tactics used by sophisticated con artists. He hasn't married yet, but he says he's learning to trust again, one day at a time. The victims of Madison's crimes formed a Facebook support group called Wedding Scam Survivors, which has grown to include hundreds of people who have been defrauded by fake wedding vendors. The group provides emotional support, shares information about legal resources, and helps members rebuild their faith in the wedding industry. Many of the members have gone on to have beautiful weddings with legitimate vendors, proving that even the deepest betrayal can't destroy the human capacity for hope and love. The chapel where Madison staged her final performance has been renovated and now hosts only charity weddings for couples who can't afford traditional ceremonies. The owner says it's his way of bringing something positive out of such a dark chapter. Every month they host a free wedding for a deserving couple, complete with flowers, photography, and a reception. It's a reminder that love, real love, doesn't need to be perfect or expensive, it just needs to be genuine. Maybe Madison just wanted to feel special, to be the center of attention in a world that had largely ignored her childhood pain. Maybe she genuinely believed that everyone else was living fake lives too, and that her deception was just more honest about its dishonesty. Or maybe she was simply a person who had learned that manipulation was more reliable than vulnerability, that controlling others was easier than facing her own emptiness. What we know for certain is that she wanted a perfect wedding, with every detail planned to create a flawless memory, but what she really needed was healing. The kind that comes from honest relationships and genuine connection with other people. Her wedding cake was layered with lies, just like everything else in her life. And underneath all those beautiful layers, there was nothing but hollow space where love should have been. In the end, perhaps the most tragic part of Madison's story isn't the money she stole or the weddings she destroyed. It's that somewhere along the way, she convinced herself that pretending to be loved was better than risking the vulnerability required for real love. She created the perfect wedding, but she could never create the one thing that would have made it meaningful. She could never create a genuine connection with another human being. Maybe she just wanted to feel special. Maybe we all do. But at what cost?